A North Carolina girl vanishes without a trace after getting off the school bus. Now her mother, who's a suspect in the girl's disappearance, has fled the country and may be headed to a region that doesn't have an extradition treaty with the US. This is the story of 11-year-old Madalina Cojocari and the nearly 2-year-long investigation to find her. This is a story we've long followed here on Law and Crime, dating back to 2022 when Madalina was last seen. It was November 21st of that year when the then 11-year-old was seen getting off the school bus in Cornelius, North Carolina. That's about 25 minutes north of Charlotte. The FBI released school bus surveillance video of this showing Madalina stand in line waiting to get off the bus. She plays with her hair a bit before walking off the bus and exiting the frame. And that is the last known sighting of Madalina. But the world didn't know about her disappearance until weeks later. After Madalina missed school for 2 straight weeks, a counselor there raised the alarm. She wasn't reported missing until December 15th, when her mother, Madalina Cojocari, was called into a meeting with her daughter's school. That's when she said she hadn't seen her daughter since November 23rd. Diana and her then husband, Christopher Palmeter, were later arrested for failure to report Madalina missing. When speaking to investigators, they each pointed the finger at the other person. According to the authorities, Diana and her mother discussed the idea that Palmeter gave Madalina away for money. This was all during a jailhouse phone call. In a separate jailhouse call, Palmeter told his brother Diana, quote, had a lot of cash with her and he did not know where it came from. He also suggested Diana sent Madalina overseas to her home country of Moldova in Eastern Europe. Both Diana and Christopher Palmeter were convicted for failure to report Madalina's disappearance. Diana pleaded guilty to the charge of failure to report and was sentenced to 6 to 17 months in prison. She served her time and was released this spring. Palmeter, however, pleaded not guilty. It was a trial that was covered by local North Carolina stations.
Your foreperson has reported to the court you found the defendant, Christopher James Palmeter, in 22 CR 366223, guilty of failure to report disappearance of a child to law enforcement. Was this your verdict? So say all of you? Yes. You may see.
Palmeter was ultimately sentenced to 30 months of probation after the verdict came down in May. And it was during this same time frame when North Carolina officials finally announced Diana was a suspect in her daughter's disappearance. We reported on the story back then, and the news that Diana had apparently left the country. On her Facebook account, Diana posted a picture of herself seemingly on an airplane. The caption read, quote, on the way from New York JFK to Frankfurt, then to Bucharest after 9 years of absence from the country. Bucharest is the largest city in Romania. That's just driving distance from Diana's native country of Moldova. Now we can confirm that Diana has left the United States, according to U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. It's also important to note that Moldova doesn't have an extradition treaty with the United States. Just last month, the North Carolina government upped the stakes in the case, offering a $25,000 reward for any information that leads to the arrest and conviction of whoever's responsible for Madalina's disappearance. Now that you're up to speed with the background of Madalina's case, it's time to bring in retired FBI agent Colin Schmidt.
Well, it just seems like, and once again, we've seen these stories over and over again. It's a very sad story. The child disappeared. The mother or the parents aren't cooperating on the whereabouts of the child, and then they decide to leave the country. So obviously, that's very damning on their culpability of the whereabouts and the safety of this child. But it's just another very sad story, and I'm glad law enforcement's following up on it. But the ultimate lead is the mom, and talking to her and having her say exactly what happened. Basically, it's following the same script as a lot of these cases, other than the fact that she left the country. But her leaving the country is not going to help her case for sure, because the North Carolina authorities are not going to give up. The case is going to stay open, and they're going to stay on it until it's either resolved one way or the other.
I think what's suspicious to me right from the jump is that when this little girl, Madalina, first went missing, her mom and stepfather didn't report her missing. It wasn't really until the school sounded the alarm that anyone really paid any attention that Madalina isn't around. So to me, right away, that's very suspicious. What do you make of that part of it?
Absolutely. Being a father, if my child was missing for more than whatever 5 hours or 6 hours, I'd be calling somebody, whether it be the police, the school, friends, family, everybody. But waiting and then basically being prompted to report it after the school, hits the alarm button is telling me that there's likely some foul play here because there's no other reason why they wouldn't report a missing child.
So I know that investigators would eventually talk to both of the parents. They were eventually charged for not reporting the little girl missing, but I'm sure they would talk to them asking, okay, when was the last time you saw her? All of the basic information from a missing persons case. But because of the delay in the time lapse from the time she went missing until it was reported, I mean, does that really bring some extra difficulty into the case? Because as we always say, the first 24 hours are the most important.
Absolutely. It makes it exceedingly difficult for law enforcement to find the child because the like I said, the timeline has now been extended for a very long period of time. So if in the case if the child has been harmed and is not alive, then it'll be harder to find the remains, as well as if the child is alive and they've had time to hide the child or move the child. It just makes it harder. And then it comes down. We don't know what their level of cooperation was when when law enforcement talked to them. Did they lawyer up? Did they get a lawyer, or did they actually do a good interview? Because that hasn't been released. So there's a lot of open questions here on what exactly the level of cooperation from the parents.
We know that Madalina's stepfather, Christopher Palmeter, is still on probation, but the focus now is really on her mother. If we're splitting them up for a second and focusing just in on the mom, Diana, we know eventually she pleaded guilty to not reporting her child missing and served some jail time. But beyond that, again, as you said, we don't really know exactly what she reported to police. What would their stance be at that time? You know, we have her convicted of this crime. She's going to be sentenced to some jail time, which she did serve. Are they going to really try to interrogate her, interview her, get more information from her? Or could she just completely lawyer up and not say anything?
Well, it's likely if the fact that she did jail time is telling me that she did not cooperate, because if she cooperated, they wouldn't have had to go that to that length and that level. And being in jail, they probably had some jailhouse informants that were around her to try to see if they could get information from her. And it sounds like they weren't able to get anything from her, and it's still a mystery on where this child is.
The stepfather also was charged with not reporting that she was missing and pleaded not guilty. He ended up going to trial for this. And when he took the stand, he basically pointed the finger at his wife, Diana, the mother, and said that she was the one responsible here. And she sent her young daughter to live overseas with family in Moldova. I guess, is that something that investigators should really be zeroing in on, this potential tip that was released at the trial?
Oh, absolutely. So I'm sure they've reached out to the FBI, uh, through the State Department through the FBI, because the FBI has access to law enforcement in Moldavia, and so I'm sure they're following up to see if if this isn't true is a true statement from him. I'm sure they're able to identify who these family members were, and it's likely they've already reached out to him and either confirmed it or not confirmed it. We don't know what the status of that is, but the fact that he's taking the stand and he's making these allegations, it's another thing that as a law enforcement officer, well, why didn't you just say that before it got to this point? And now you're on the stand, pointing fingers. You could have helped the law enforcement, 6 months ago, and we would not have gotten to this point. And then that would have been 6 months of time that would have been saved identifying this child in Moldavia.
That's the next major hurdle in this case, the locations involved and who has jurisdiction over them. The fact that this involves some overseas areas, does that make things a little bit more difficult? Because we know her mother is from overseas, from Eastern Europe. And I mean, they live in North Carolina, but then there's traveling back and forth there. I mean, doesn't that kind of muddy the waters a bit?
Well, absolutely. It does make it more complicated because you still, the FBI doesn't have any authority in Moldavia, neither does the State Department. You have to ask for assistance from the local authorities. And I'm sure they would be very cooperative, but there is a process you have to go through to get that information to the local authorities, to get them to go ahead and follow up on this information. So just by the fact that it's a distance and it's time makes it a lot more complicated for law enforcement to do their job.
We're talking a lot about the mom in this case because we know she served jail time, wasn't super cooperative in the case, but now we have confirmed that she's left the country. This is kind of tricky because she is a suspect in the case, but she doesn't have any charges against her, so she should be free to go back to her home country. I don't know. What do you think about all that?
Well, that's her right. She's not under arrest. I'm watching a Netflix show right now where the law enforcement told the family, "Well, you have to stay here." And I'm thinking to myself, "Well, it works great for a plot, but in real life, that's not how it works. If you want to keep somebody in a certain place, well, then you have to arrest them, and then a judge will put particulars on them as far as, okay, they can't leave the city, the state, the county, or they have to wear a tracking bracelet. So in this case, she's figured, okay, well, I did my time. I'm getting out of the country, and I'll go to Moldavia or wherever where it's safe for her, and she has friends, so American law enforcement can't get to her.
My next question with all this is if she's going to a country that doesn't have an extradition treaty, if back in the States, eventually investigators do say, yeah, we have enough evidence that it's her, and prosecutors want to charge her, how does that work if she's in a country where there's no extradition treaty with the United States?
Well, they have to wait till she travels to a country that does have extradition. So they would put in something called a red notice through Interpol, which basically means when she goes through customs and immigration for a friendly country that participates in the red notice process, the law enforcement would get notified, and then they sometimes the border guards would place that person under arrest based upon the red notice, and then they would wait for the paperwork to catch up, or the process, which can be very lengthy. When it comes to extradition, it could take up to sometimes 2 years to extradite somebody. But if she's in a country that's not extraditable, um, she probably knows that, and she probably knows not to travel to countries that do have extradition treaties with the United States.
What's interesting about her role in all of this is obviously she didn't report that her daughter was missing, but then investigators didn't confirm that she was a suspect in the case till a year and a half later. Why would they have waited so long to report to the public, news stations? We reported on it that she may have been involved and she is a prime suspect in her daughter's disappearance.
Well, once again, we don't know what the inner workings of the case is. So it just speculating that basically that might be a ploy to put more pressure on her to cooperate, to tell them where the child is, whether alive or not alive, or who's cooperating with her. So the fact that it took so long, I mean, the law enforcement is under no obligation to report this information to the public. If they are doing, it's likely, like I said, an investigative strategy to get her to cooperate.
Investigators in North Carolina have confirmed that they issued a search warrant at Diana's home after Madalina first went missing. But beyond that, the details are sparse. Is it possible that they didn't collect anything worth noting? Or is it possible they have something that is important? They just didn't mention it because they're kind of keeping the details closer to the vest.
I think that the latter, they're just trying to keep everything quiet because they don't want to tip their hand with the mother and or maybe family members that are helping keep the truth out of the light of day. So law enforcement generally doesn't reveal the details of a search warrant because of they want to protect the integrity of the case.
We're talking about the details of the case, and you're saying investigators don't want to reveal all of their cards, which makes sense if this is going to be prosecuted down the line. One of the other things that I saw reported was after Madalina was reported missing, she was apparently seen on surveillance video. We can't 100% confirm that it was her, but it was a girl that matched her description, and she was with somebody who looked like one of her relatives. Is this something that investigators would immediately zero in on, that they would try to confirm that it was her?
Absolutely, yeah. They're going to follow up on this lead, and more importantly, they're going to want to identify and talk to that relative and get because the relative is more likely going to cooperate than the mother if the mother did something wrong, because the relative doesn't want to get themselves in trouble. Loyalty only goes so far when it comes down to you're staring at jail time, or depending on the sophistication of the relative, on how they're going to react to law enforcement. But it also comes back to if the whole family got lawyers, then law enforcement is going to have to go through their legal representation to get any cooperation from these people.
We've also seen recently that there has been a new $25,000 reward that was put out for any information that leads to the arrest and conviction of someone that was involved in Madalina's disappearance. This is kind of a big number. 25,000 is kind of a lot, and it's again almost 2 years since she went missing. Is this unusual to see this sort of giant reward this long after the girl has been missing?
No, I think it's basically they want to shake the tree a little bit and get more leads because they've probably exhausted all the leads they have now. So now they need more leads to work on, and this is the most logical and straightforward way of getting people to cooperate. And possibly they're looking for some family members that are greedy and they want to get some money and they don't have a lot of loyalty to her to go ahead and call in and give them the information they need to progress the case.
And unfortunately, I've talked to you specifically about a lot of disappearances and cases like this that involve the FBI because they're more common than we would like to discuss. And that always leads into my next question that's a hard one to talk about. Madalina has almost been missing for 2 years. Is it possible that she's still out there and is alive?
Well, anything's possible, yeah. So it's possible, but it is a function of time. The likelihood of finding a child that's alive and in good standing. There has been cases of kids that have been found, but those are exceedingly rare. When you start getting it out that long, the odds go down drastically on a good outcome for this case.
Madalina's disappearance is still under investigation, so anyone with more information should reach out to the Cornelius Police Department in North Carolina. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Gillespie.